These two are Porsches. On the right, you have a 992 generation of the Porsche 911 Carrera, the base trim. And on the left, the 718 Cayman GT4, second from the top on the mid-engine platform. Now, while they are both Porsche sport cars, they were made with very different objectives in mind. Where on the right-hand side, you have more of a grand touring car, something that allows you to enjoy performance on a daily basis with seemingly perfect driving dynamics. And on the left, you have something that's a bit more focused, more of a track-inspired variant of the 911's baby brother. Both great cars in their own merit. But late one night, I was on the Porsche Configurator building a car that I have no chance of affording, and I realized something. The base model 911 Carrera and the GT4 have very similar price points. So it kind of got me thinking, why not go for the GT4? Or why not go for the 911? What would make you choose one over the other? So I did a poll on YouTube, and after 500 votes, it was the first poll I've ever done that had an even 50-50 split for the results. So I wasn't the only one that was having a hard time deciding. Naturally, I thought it would be a great idea to test them against each other. So in today's video, we're gonna take them back to back for a quick drive on the same route and see why you would choose one or the other. And at the end of the video, I'll let you know which one I would choose.
First off, let's get the specs out of the way. So here is a quick overview of the 992 Gen Porsche 911 Carrera versus the 718 Porsche Cayman GT4. So take a look at these specs real quick and see how they compare.
Just looking at the specs on paper, the GT4 kind of seems like the obvious choice. It's less expensive to buy, it's still naturally aspirated, it's a more powerful car, quicker from 0 to 60, has more cargo space. There doesn't really seem to be all that much of a benefit to go for the 911, but that is on paper. I think there's going to be much more to the story when we get these things out on the road. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And I think just to be logical, we should probably start with the GT4. So slight change of plans. We're going to actually do the 911 first, but that's not a big deal. We'll do the GT4 in just a second. So straight away, you're going to notice the 911 is quite a lot more comfortable. It's not that the GT4 is uncomfortable, but it's set up for the track. So it's a much stiffer suspension setup. It is adjustable, but again, let's focus on the 911. For the 992 generation, Porsche really pulled out all of the stops. All new interior, new exterior. It's a beautiful looking car and it's a really nice place to be. They've made the 911 much easier to live with on a daily basis. I would actually go as far as calling it a comfortable car. The thing about the 911 is, though, that since the 991.2 generation, for the most part, all 911s are now turbocharged with a few exceptions like your GT3s and GT3 RSs. And that's a bit of a sticking point to some people. Now, when you consider, well, which one should you buy, it's gonna come down to what do you want the car for? What are you gonna be using the car for? If you're using the car to drive every single day, you want some decent technology in the car, you want it to be relatively easy to drive around if you need to get up on driveways and that sort of a thing, the 911 has better ground clearance than the GT4 and it's gonna be a much more comfortable ride. Another consideration you need to make is that for the base 911, you can only get PDK. There is no manual option for the base car. I think there is once you get up to the S, but that's a completely different price point. So if you want a manual car, the answer is really simple. You go for the GT4. Now, of course, with the turbochargers comes a tiny bit of turbo lag, but what's much more noticeable is the torque. And once those turbos kick in, you get a massive surge of torque. One really nice thing I would say about this car is that it has a split personality. You have your drive mode selection dial on the steering wheel, as you do with most Porsches, I think, nowadays. So in normal mode, it's a great, comfortable, long distance cruiser. I could drive this car all day long, leave it in auto mode, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, no problem whatsoever. But if I want to switch it over to Sport Plus mode, for example, The PASM light comes on, telling you that your suspension is a bit stiffer. Your active exhaust opens up, gets much more aggressive sounding, much more pleasing to the ears, in my opinion. The RPMs are going to be held higher. Right now they're holding them at 3,000 RPM. It's not shifting down by itself, which means that your turbos are primed. They're ready to go. And so your throttle response is much more immediate. And I'm telling you, the sound, oh, it sounds absolutely amazing. I feel like in normal mode, you hear more of the turbos. In Sport Plus mode, it almost feels like you hear more of that flat six, which is great. That's part of the benefit of the 911, why I think it has such a big following. In many ways, it's kind of the perfect sports car. It's the all-around sports car. And with this 992 generation, all they've done, as they do with every generation, is improve and improve and improve. Another benefit of the 911 that you really should be considering when buying a car is whether or not it holds its value. The 911 is an anomaly. It doesn't really go by any traditional rules, because if you go to any other German manufacturer, buy their sports cars, their luxury cars, whatnot, within 5 years, you can't even give them away. They're worth fractions of what you paid for them. And with the 911, that's simply not the case. They retain their value extremely well, and with a lot of cases, they actually appreciate in value. And with sports cars and supercars specifically, there's a pretty substantial impact to the value of your car when you put miles on them. That's why you see Ferraris and Lamborghinis and McLarens that are 4, 5, 6, 7 years old with barely any miles on them. Also not the case with the 911. So you go on the used market for 911s and you'll find a bunch of cars with 10, 15, 20, 30, 40,000 miles. That's because you can drive these cars and you still won't lose a bunch of money on the car. It holds its value. Don't be hindered by the fact that this is a base model. It's a base model of one of the greatest sports cars ever made. And I think if you're looking for something that's just an all-around sports car, something that does everything and does it really well, it's gonna be the 911. I feel like that's just the car to go for, but maybe the GT4 will be too. We'll find out right now, because we're gonna park this up, jump in the GT4, and do the exact same route and see how it compares. We're in the GT4, and the naturally aspirated flat six feels old school. In fact, this entire car feels old school, and I think that's part of its appeal. The driving position is brilliant. You don't have too much technology, at least not something that's in your face, super noticeable. And what I mean by that is in the 911 on the interior, it's a beautiful interior, but there's a lot of screens everywhere. The interior on the 718 GT4, it's not all that different from the 981. So largely we've had this interior setup since 2013. So it's been a decade. For that reason, it's very familiar and it's very old school. So you have physical buttons. There are screens, there's a touch screen, but it doesn't have too much stuff on it. Part of all of that is to keep you from getting distracted from the task of driving, which is what this car is all about. It's all about driving pleasure, driving feel, the sensations of enjoying a sports car. Another thing I talked about briefly in the 911 was how it sounds really good in Sport Plus mode and you can hear that flat six a lot better. That is very true. But this doesn't have a in Sport Plus mode caveat to it. It sounds brilliant through and through. Whether you have the exhausts, active exhaust on or not, it sounds very visceral, very loud. Again, not quite as loud and visceral as the previous generation, but when you consider that this car was in production all the way up to 2023, I believe the GT4 is no longer in production, if I'm not mistaken. For 2024, the GT4 RS is your only option, but for a car made today, this sounds amazing. And I did a really quick comparison of the two exhausts, so check that out and let me know in the comments which one you like more. Everything I'm about this car is a bit more raw. The suspension is a bit more raw. The sound of the exhaust is so much more raw. There's no electronic controls to adjust your steering wheel. The door handles don't exist. It's just a fabric door pull. It feels tight, nimble. One of the downsides of this car, now that I've kind of toned it down a little bit and we're just driving, it's not that comfortable of a car. It's not an uncomfortable car where it's intolerable and you need a new spine after every journey, but you feel all the bumps, you feel all of the changes in elevation on the road, the brakes squeak, I mean, they just do, and the engine, the tone of the engine is always there and it sounds great. On a long journey, if you wanted something, you know, if you want to just wind back and relax, you can't turn the engine off. It's never gonna be quieter. Whereas with the 911, you just put it into normal mode and then you're cruising. So there's that huge benefit really of the 911 as an everyday car, whereas the GT4, it's a GT4 24/7, 7 days a week. You can't turn off the GT4-ness of this car. With the 911, you can. You have a little bit more flexibility with what your driving experience is gonna be like. I think that the Cayman is an old sports car today. That's what I think it is, the GT4 specifically, because it is a bit more rough, which sports cars used to be more rough. It's smaller. The 911 is a sports car, but it's obtuse. It's quite a large car. It has a lot of presence. And even with this massive rear wing on this GT4, I still look at it as being a small car, and therefore it's a very fun car to drive. It's very darty in the way that it changes direction. The steering input feels like I'm reaching through the car and just turning the wheels with my bare hands. And that's to say that there's a lot of feedback from the tires, and that's what you want from a car like this. And of course, it being a naturally aspirated Porsche, once you hit 4,000 RPM, it just becomes a different car. I don't know if you can tell from the video or from the audio, but it does get quite loud in here, especially compared to that 911, and that's more of what you're gonna need to consider when you go for the GT4. It's, I don't wanna say not as livable, but it's not as livable of a car. It's really more for enthusiasts, and I think that's why it just has so much respect in the community, because Porsche has made a car that really shouldn't exist in this day and age. It's a manual transmission, naturally aspirated. It wants to be driven, it should be. It rewards you for driving it like a sports car, like a race car. It doesn't want to be driven at normal speeds. It wants to be driven at speed. Going into the corners, it is so planted. I feel like I can enter any corner at just about any speed, and this car will stick the landing. It's perfect. Some people complain about how rough it is. Some people complain that the second gear is too long and you can reach too high of a speed. I think those people are looking for a reason not to call this car perfect, because this car's perfect. I think it's no surprise that the car that I would choose between this and the 911, it's this. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and a huge thank you to Porsche of Riverside, who've loaned me both of these cars. Now, if you're in the market for a Porsche Cayman GT4 or a 911, these two are actually currently for sale. So I'll leave the regular links in the description down below for you to check them out. Now, I do want to say though, if you are in the market for one of these cars, just like with the Cayenne Turbo GT that we filmed last week, that's not actually the GT4 that I was supposed to shoot today. There was a shark blue one to match this 911, but it sold this morning. So if you're in the market, these might not last all that long, and that's not a sales pitch. I don't get any kind of a commission or anything like that. It's just, if you want the car, they might not be around for very long. So reach out to Porsche of Riverside, let them know that CarCave sent you. Otherwise, comment your thoughts on these two cars. If you have them, share your story so other people can read about them, know what it's like to own these cars. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to show your support for the channel and so you don't miss a post. But until the next video, thank you so much for watching, and take care.